127 Pets. Chapter 4. Day 3. The sun's rays along the canyon awoke the sleeping Pegasus. She whimpered, feeling a tickle along her chin. With a free hoof, she tried to push off the unknown feeling. After a few misses, she finally flicked away the disturbance, sending it to the ground. Her eyes shifted open. She flicked an ant to the floor. Her blurry eyes watched as the insect crawled away into some nearby rocks. After being fully awake, Rainbow Dash stretched her shoulder, sitting up on her flank. After chipping away at the boulder for so long, Rainbow tried an experiment. She placed both of her hooves under the rock, and with all her might tried to push it up. Since it lost a bit of mass due to her pecking at it with the knife, she assumed it would be easier.
Come on, move, you stupid rock!
She started to use her entire body to push the boulder. It just laid there, unfazed by the Pegasus's force.
Ah!
Rainbow gave one final scream to boost her strength. After a few minutes of grunting and screaming to move the heavy rock, Rainbow finally called it quits. Her arms went limp as she nearly fell on her back, panting heavily.
This is insane!
She cursed in anger. Realizing her words would never hurt the rock, Rainbow rested her head on it. Her mind became foggy as the Pegasus began to think back to Ponyville. Her mind teleported to the small town, seeing all the ponies just minding their own business. She thought of inside her cloud house. It was still the same before she left. Suddenly, Rainbow started to think about water. She gulped it down in thirst. Her breathing became silent as she let her eyes wander around the cave. Her thoughts finally went to her 5 best friends. She remembered one memory. Her mind flashed to her last birthday party. It took place in Twilight's library, being just a month ago. They did so many things back then. Something Rainbow remembered was the drinks. They had sodas and punch. Just thinking of the cold drinks made Rainbow curl back her tongue. She brought a hoof to her lips, lightly rubbing them. Her saliva was starting to become sticky and dry, and her lips were turning white. She glanced at the water-filled bottle beside her. Rainbow quickly picked it up, popping off the lid, slowly taking a sip. Her eyes were concentrated. After a few seconds of slow drinking, they went wide as she took the bottle off her mouth. Rainbow gave a cough, dropped her eyes towards the bottle. Not much water was left, being only 100 milliliters. Rainbow quickly slid the lid back on, placing the bottle on her side. Rainbow quickly slid the lid back on, placing the bottle to her side. She glanced back at her wing. Her eyebrows went down, still seeing her tools of flight practically smashed by the heavy boulder. Rainbow shook her head, scavenging through her gray bag. She pulled out a camera, carefully placing it on the boulder, the lens facing her. In a flick of a switch, she turned on the camera. It let out a light buzzing noise as the lenses lit up. "It's been a bummer day," she started, giving an audible breath. "I've been hitting this rock all day, although, nothing much has happened." Her eyes kept its sleepy look. She now constantly had tears in them, though they weren't a bother. "This boulder is too heavy." She looked downwards. "And the friction here isn't really helping." There was a pause. Rainbow kept looking at the camera. "What I could really use is some kind of hammer." Rainbow lifted a hoof to the camera, holding an imaginary hammer as she pretended to hit the boulder. "That way I could break this thing." Rainbow lightly nodded her head. "That would just about do it." Her tone of voice became quieter, almost whispering. She picked up the bottle, showing it to the camera. For a few seconds, Rainbow glanced between the water and the device filming her. "I have about 100 milliliters of water left, which should keep me alive until tomorrow night. If I'm lucky." She took a pause, breathing out. Sorry. Sorry. I repeated that twice. Yeah." She looked down towards her stomach. Suddenly, her voice became slightly higher. "I'm pretty hungry, you know. But it doesn't matter. My entire body has been aching pretty weird." On the last phase, Rainbow gave a light chuckle, making the tender moment last for a few seconds. "It's been really bad, but, I'm sure it'll pass soon." She narrowed her eyes towards the camera, giving a worried smile. just got to chill, you know. While she spoke, a lizard just a few meters away crawled on the nearby rocks. The animal's eyes narrowed at the fallen Pegasus. Rainbow had been there for so long without company that she started to make unnecessary conversations with the camera. It got lonely, so she had to do something to pass the time. Rainbow looked up to the sky, seeing that same black bird from before. There's this raven that comes every morning. Her mouth hung open, watching the bird fly by. After a few seconds had gone by, Rainbow looked back at the camera. It comes all the time. She thought back to the last day of when she had those few minutes of sun shine down on her. I get about 15 minutes of sunlight per day. Her eyes went back to her wing under the boulder. As you know, I've been chipping away at the rock, though I think my wing is supporting this rock, so I chip a little bit and it settles more. Her mind then flashed back to something she had tried earlier. Rainbow carefully pulled a rubber string she had brought to the trip. Using both of her hooves, she tied it around her grounded wing. She wrapped it around the feathers and skin, pulling very tightly. Oh, yeah. Rainbow gave a smile of pain, feeling the tightness on her wing. She kept pulling on this rubber string until she couldn't any more. Quickly, Rainbow grabbed the knife in her mouth. She bent over, her teeth clenched on the wooden handle. That's when Rainbow started to move the blade back and forth, sliding the edge over her wing repeatedly. Seconds went by, and Rainbow sucked on her teeth. Grrr! She gave a grunt as sweat came down on her face. The knife wasn't doing anything. It was too dull to cut even skin. It was pretty much a butter knife, and the only injury it caused were a few scratches on the skin of her wing. After a few minutes of trying, Rainbow stopped. She let out a breath she had been holding, panting quietly. Rainbow held the camera up, its lenses pointing straight at her wing. It had a few scratches and bruises on it, and a few feathers were torn off. It hasn't been very useful. She put the camera back on the boulder, giving a light smile. Here's a lesson. Don't buy cheap knives. They really do suck. She shook her head in denial. I should have brought my good knife, and my flashlight, but the flashlight is a piece of crap too. Rainbow looked straight at the camera. Her smile died down as her eyes became teary. I don't blame you girls, my friends. You could have never known I would get trapped in this situation. Rainbow finally thought back to all the adventures she and her friends had been through. It was always a fun time, as they each learned lessons throughout the times. Way to go, girls. She gave one final phrase of encouragement before shutting off the camera. A few hours later. The sun's light lowered under the horizon, and not a single cloud could be seen in the sky at the moment. Rainbow rested her head on the shoulder. She wasn't sleeping, just doing nothing out of boredom. She tried turning her body, though her ears perked as she heard something knocking it down. Rainbow went in shock as she turned around to meet the unknown object. Her bottle laid on its side. The water was slowly seeping out. With quick thinking, Rainbow grabbed the bottle, lifting it back up so gravity forced the water down. She carefully examined the bottle. About half the water was gone. Damn it! She cursed, her voice having much more emotion than before. Tears began to fall down her cheeks as Rainbow began to rapidly sniff. It's not fair! She smacked her head against the boulder, crying. Her tears came crashing to the dirty ground, it being washed away by the dryness of the canyon. A few minutes had passed. Rainbow stared blankly at her bottle. She couldn't cry anymore after being dehydrated for so long. After snapping back to reality, Rainbow slid the lid back on the bottle, placing it to the side. Her face still looked terrible. Her breathing became louder as her teeth clenched. After a few minutes of grief, Rainbow finally let herself sleep as the moon lit up the sky. Chapter 5.
Please! Please!
Rainbow begged in her sleep, sweating under the bag which covered her head. She painfully gritted her teeth, giving sharp and loud breaths. Water enveloped in Rainbow's eyes as she shot tears down her cheeks, the drops splashing at the bottom of the bag. The tip of her muzzle was drenched in sweat. Her eyes clenched shut as her brain felt foggy.
Please!
For the last time, she screamed in her mind, before quieting down. Asking to be released from the boulder and sleep wouldn't help. Ever. The next day. The bright shine beamed from the horizon, waking up everything in its path. Rainbow made sure to wake up early. She watched as the sun's light began to cover the deserted canyon. The grounded Pegasus wore a smile for an odd reason. She planned some kind of event, though only she would know. Rainbow held the camera, placing it on the boulder with the lenses facing her. She ducked, leaving the device's peripheral vision. With a sneaky hoof, she turned the camera on while behind the boulder. The device gave its usual buzzing noise as it started to film down the rocky walls. Rainbow was nowhere in sight. After a few minutes of waiting, the Rainbow Pegasus shot out of cover, coming right in front of the camera, wearing a professional smile. Her eyes lit up as she licked her lips. "Good morning, every pony!" She looked up, spotting the direction of the sun's light. "It's about morning here in Ghastly Gorge, and this morning on the boulder." She spoke the last phrase while tilting her head. "We have a very special guest, self-proclaimed equestrian superhero, Rainbow Dash." Rainbow looked away, viewing the imaginary crowd that surrounded her. "Come on, boys and girls, let's hear it for Rainbow Dash." Her head nodded as she heard the fake applause emitting from the canyon. After the crowd died down from their clapping and cheering, Rainbow looked back at the camera with soft eyes. "Hey, hi, oh gosh, it's a real pleasure to be here, thank you." The cheering in Rainbow's head continued. She gave a sheepish smile. "Yeah, thank you." She spoke while giving a light chuckle. After looking around the walls, Rainbow looked back at the camera. "Hey, can I say hi to all my friends?" Suddenly, her entire facial expression changed to a more confident look. She narrowed her eyes, smiling. "Your friends. Mustn't forget your friends, right, Rainbow?" She shifted back to her softer look. "Yeah, that's right. She took a pause. "Hey, girls, I'm really sorry I didn't get to see you the other night. If I had, I would tell you where I was going." She shook her head. "Well, I probably wouldn't be here right now." She went back to her announcer voice. "That's for sure." More imaginary laughter could be heard. "But like I always say, your supreme selfishness is our gain." She motioned a hoof to herself. "Thank you, Rainbow Dash. Is there any pony else you would like to say hi to?" My coworkers at work." She thought of all the Pegasi she worked on while managing the weather in Ponyville. "Hey guys, sorry I probably won't be coming in for work today." More made-up laughter from all around the canyon screamed to the Pegasus. "Ha! Get a load of this Oh, wait. Hold on." She held a hoof to her ear, pretending to be wearing an earphone. "We have a question coming in from another Rainbow Dash in Ghastly Loser Gorge, the canyon for losers." More laughter could be heard. Rainbow asks, "Am I right in thinking that even if my coworkers from work notify the guards, they would be putting a 24-hour hold on me, which means I would only be considered missing until tomorrow morning at the earliest?" Yeah, you're right on the dot, Rainbow Dash." "Which means," she started to whisper, "I'll probably be dead by then." Another burst of laughter could be heard. "Wow, Rainbow Dash, how do you know so much?" Rainbow took out another pause, breathing out. "Well, I'll tell you why I know so much. I volunteered for the rescue service." Rainbow went wide-eyed, being at full attention with her other self. "You see, I'm something of a, her eyes rolled in thought, "something of a big, bucking, hard hero, and I can do everything on my own, you see." Rainbow squinted her eyes, looking straight into the buzzing camera. "I do ski." More clapping was heard. "Now tell me, is it true that despite, or maybe because you're a big, bucking, hard hero," her voice became more playful before switching back to a sad tone, "you didn't tell any pony where you were going?" Yeah, that's absolutely correct." Rainbow's announcing side narrowed her, giving a confused look. Raising an eyebrow, she asked, "Any pony?" She shook her head as the light laughter came from the imaginary audience. "Any pony," she confirmed. Rainbow leaned in, opening her mouth wide. As she closed them, only one word came out. "Oops." The laughing got louder. She leaned back, looking down at her wing. The crowd died down along with her happiness. "Oops." Her voice barely became audible. She kept nodding her head before finally looking up to the lens. "Oops." The conversation she just had with herself didn't even feel memorable, just plain and empty. Rainbow gave a gulp, breathing out. She started. "Twilight, Rarity, Applejack, Pinkie Pie, and Fluttershy. I just want to take this time to tell you that the times we spent together has been something very important to me. She took a pause. Tears were visible on the edges of her eyes. And I haven't appreciated you in my heart enough because I know that I could. Rainbow laid her hooves on the boulder, looking closely. She sucked on her tongue as she continued. I love you, girls, and I'll always be with you. She gave a light nod in agreement before slowly shutting the camera off. On the press of a switch, the buzzing stopped, and Rainbow was left alone again. Many hours later. Rainbow took out her water bottle, looking closely to see the 50 milliliters left inside. She slowly opened it, flipping it over towards her mouth. Rainbow gave muffled moans as the last bit of water seeped down her throat. She began to suck on the lid, sucking in any droplets of water that were missed. She stuck her dry tongue in, absorbing anything around the bottle. Seconds went by, and Rainbow finally took the bottle off her dehydrated mouth. She licked her lips in desperation, making sure not to miss anything. She rubbed her face, looking around the walls to see nothing but darkness approach. Suddenly, Rainbow felt a pain in her chest. She held a hoof to it, eyebrows tilting down. Her heart rate was increasing dramatically. Rainbow's breath became loud and short. Sweat dripped down her forehead as the pain in her chest continued. Each second that passed by, Rainbow's breath became sharper. Her hoof found its way to the knife. She slowly picked it up, looking at it with grief. Her teeth gritted as her heart nearly ripped out of her chest. Suddenly, with all her strength and courage, Rainbow stabbed her wing. The metal blade ripped a few inches deep through her cyan skin and feathers. Rainbow grunted loudly as dark blood dripped out of her pinned wing. The red fluid came out where the knife met the wing, though it wasn't as painful as she thought it would be. Rainbow removed her hoof from the blunt knife, leaving her wing with a metal tool sticking out of it. As drops of blood continued to spill, a light air sound shot through her body. Her breathing became quieter as she stretched her neck. Oh, she grunted while looking back down to her knife-impaled wing. She slowly tightened the rubber string around her wing, dulling the pain more. She leaned her head closer as her mouth found its way back to the knife. She started to twirl the knife around, feeling the tip scratch against something hard. Whatever it was, it created crackling noise. Bone, she slowly whispered to herself. After a few seconds of scratching her bone, Rainbow ripped the knife out, leaving a flesh wound on her skin, with blood lightly seeping out. She rubbed a free hoof against the stab wound, sinking the tip inside. Rainbow licked her lips as she pulled out, witnessing blood on the tip of her hoof. Without much thinking, she threw her hoof into her mouth, sucking off the blood. It tasted like metal, though she would do anything to have something relatively close to water. She lay there, motionless. After stabbing your wing and sucking some blood off of it, it would leave you quite in shock. Her eyes were too dry for tears, so she laid her head on the boulder, leaving a stab wound right in her wing. A few hours later. By now, it was nightfall. The moon hung in the middle of the sky, illuminating the dark canyon. Rainbow had the bag over her head again. This time, the camera was filming. In a flick of a switch, she turned it on, presenting the fake audience with a sad gaze. Her breathing was ragged. She licked her dry lips. Hey, so I'm finally out of water. That means I'll probably stay alive till tomorrow, and I guess that's it. She took a painful pause, guiding her hoofs to the off switch. I love you all, and I'm so sorry for getting myself to this. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. As she spoke her last words, she turned off the camera. Rainbow threw the bag off her head, placing the camera aside. Having a look of anger, Rainbow quickly picked up the blunt knife. She immediately started to roughly grind the blade against the boulder, scratching lines behind the knife. Hours passed, and Rainbow kept this motion running. After the ache in her shoulder was too much, she finally came to a rest. Rainbow's eyes stared blankly at the knife. It looked sharp after sliding it against the rock for so long. She blew the dust off it, examining her new tool. Looks like useful things can be made out of cheap knives, she spoke, her voice extremely raspy. Suddenly, a quiet crash shot through behind Rainbow, She quickly turned around, darting her eyes back and forth through the rocky hall. She would scream for help, but she couldn't. Her voice was too weak now to do anything but whisper. Rainbow turned back, placing the knife down and resting her head on his shoulder after going so long without any sleep. She closed her eyes, trying to dream of her friends back in Ponyville. Instead, she only dreamed of stillness as her muscles relaxed.